Regardless of which helping profession you enter, you will be faced with learning to define and maintain appropriate boundaries with your clients. Ethic codes alone will not keep helpers from behaving in unethical ways. Good judgment and the willingness to reflect on your practices and being aware of your motivations are critical dimensions of being an ethical practitioner. Ethical boundaries are often raised when helpers blend their professional relationship and another kind of relationship with a client. Multiple relationships occur when the professional assumes two or more roles simultaneously or sequentially with a person seeking their help. The scope of multiple relationships may involve assuming more than one professional role at a time, such as an instructor or a supervisor and a therapist, or blending a professional and a non-professional relationship, such as a counselor and a business partner. Other multiple relationships result from providing therapy to a relative or a friend's relative, socializing with clients, becoming emotionally or sexually involved with a client or former client, borrowing money from a client, or loaning money to a client. Dealing with the power differential that is a basic part of most professional relationships, managing boundary issues, and striving to avoid the misuse of power is all part of learning to deal with ethical relationships. Think of some multiple relationships that cannot be avoided and are not considered multiple relationships. For example, a case manager that makes home visits. Another example is the case manager that accompanies a client to a dreaded medical appointment. Or a youth counselor that plays basketball with an adolescent client to relieve stress and to find common ground in which to build a relationship. Remember that there are clinical reasons for these types of relationships, and you will document in your client's electronic health record exactly the circumstances of these types of sessions. These types of examples might best be considered boundary crossings, a departure from standard practice that could potentially benefit clients. These crossings may lead to blurring of professional roles, however, and can result in multiple relationships that do have a potential to be harmful. However, a boundary violation is a serious breach that causes harm to the client. It is critical to take steps to prevent boundary crossings from becoming boundary violations. Here are some guidelines for setting boundaries. Therapists should avoid crossing boundaries if doing so would likely harm the client or would be expected to impair the therapist's objectivity, judgment, competence, or interfere with his or her therapeutic effectiveness. For your discussion forum for Chapter 9, you will discuss some of these steps to take in setting boundaries with clients, and which steps will you keep in mind and operate with. The therapist needs to explain the purpose of the boundary crossing within the context of the goals of the professional relationship, and this should clearly be documented in the client's record. However, if the risks outweigh the benefits of the boundary crossing, helpers should decline to enter the relationship, explain the rationale to the client, and if necessary, offer a referral to another professional. If you do develop a friendship with a former client, he or she is no longer eligible to use your professional services in the future. I have a belief that once the client is my client, they always have a right to come back and see me in the future. Therefore, they are always my client. Under this belief, socializing with former clients is never an option. Social media is a relatively new phenomenon in the helper relationship, and as such, many of the codes of ethics may or may not have had time to get revisions to address these issues. Social media is also changing, and so you will be responsible for determining a social media policy and need to let the clients know of your boundaries during the informed consent process in the beginning of the relationship in order to avoid problems and hurt feelings later when you don't friend someone on Facebook. Bartering is when you accept personal services from the client in exchange for cost of the services. Bartering may be ethical only under the following conditions: if the client requests it, if it is not clinically contraindicated, if it is not exploitative, and if the arrangement is entered into with full informed consent. Usually this means in writing and reviewed regularly. It is also important that potential problems that might develop be discussed. It is the helper's responsibility to identify the potential problems and risks, not the client's responsibility. Prudence dictates, however, that bartering should be an option of last resort. Small gifts given by either the client or the counselor as part of a termination process may be appropriate and valuable from a clinical perspective. Incentives can also be used in programs, wherein the client earns the incentive upon some completion of a goal. Incentives are different than gifts, as incentives are available to all who participate in the program with the same completion standards. In all cases, the incentive or the gift given by the client or the counselor should be documented in a client's record. Some helpers feel guilty over an attraction toward a client, and they feel uncomfortable if they sense that a client is attracted to them. There is a tendency to treat sexual feelings as if they shouldn't exist, which makes it difficult for helpers to recognize and accept them. Most helpers have experienced sexual attraction to a client, which can result in their feeling anxious, guilty, or confused. It is important that you acknowledge your feelings, but not to the client, and avoid developing inappropriate sexual intimacies with a client. I say in my classes, repeat with me, I will not have sex with my clients. It is the helper's responsibility to manage his or her feelings towards clients and maintain appropriate boundaries with a client by setting clear limits. Talk with a colleague and your supervisor, seeking personal counseling if necessary. Peer supervision groups are ideal places to discuss sexual feelings about clients. Again, it is the helper's responsibility to avoid sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct is one of the major causes for malpractice actions against mental health providers. The reason why this is unethical centers on the power that helpers have by virtue of their professional role. The clients are talking about very personal aspects of their lives and making themselves highly vulnerable. In addition, the helper may be helping the individual get housing, or get clean and sober, or to solve some legal problems. The client is in a very vulnerable position, and the helper holds a lot of power over the outcome of the relationship. So here are some potential consequences for sexual relationships with current clients. And here are the potential emotional consequences for the clients. Helpers are cautioned against forming romantic relationships with former clients for a specified time period, usually 2 to 5 years after termination. However, the burden of demonstrating that there has been no exploitation clearly rests with the practitioner. Most in the helping professions agree that termination of a helping relationship in and of itself does not justify changing the professional relationship to a sexual one. Now on to Chapter 9, Discussion Forum, your chance to discuss setting boundaries with clients. Then to Chapter 9, Quiz. Good luck!